This is a production of WGBH-2 Boston.
Tonight on Greater Boston, on his way to Kenosha, Wisconsin, the president said he's helping heal the racial divisions there and around the country. But many would say otherwise. Ahead, I'm joined by a former head of the NAACP and the director of the ACLU's Massachusetts Racial Justice Program. Then later, Massachusetts' two most recent Teachers of the Year join me on why they think the state's back-to-school guidelines failed both students and teachers, plus how the pandemic has changed the biggest moving day of the year in Boston. So Donald Trump visited Kenosha today, not to meet with the family of the man who's lying paralyzed in a hospital bed after being shot in the back 7 times by police, but to, quote, survey the damage following protests. And then during a roundtable, he started off by declaring everyone could take off their masks if they wanted. He then made this announcement.
So I'm committed to helping Kenosha rebuild. We all are. We will provide $1 million to the Kenosha law enforcement so that you have some extra money to go out and do what you have to do. You took it was a rough week, to put it mildly, and you've done it incredibly well. I'm also providing nearly $4 million to support these small businesses that I talked about today that got burned up, burned down. And we're going to be providing over $42 million to support public safety statewide, including direct support for law enforcement and funding for additional prosecutors.
I must have missed the protesters' calls for additional prosecutors. Trump's visit, of course, comes despite the mayor and governor asking the president to delay his trip for fear it would further increase tensions. But the president's response to that concern?
Well, it could also increase enthusiasm, and it could increase love and respect for our country.
It could, but it likely will not. Here's how the president responded when he was asked this morning if his statements and actions are helping heal racial division.
I think it's helping because I'm about law and order. And as far as the previous administration, take a look at Baltimore. What happened? Was it Freddie Gray? Take a look at Baltimore. Take a look at St. Louis. Take a look at Ferguson. Take a look at what happened. What they had was put what we're doing, it put them to shame. I also saw the way they shot the young gentleman in the street. He was targeted. They targeted him. They shot him in the street, and then they were so happy, and he died. You don't mention that. You mentioned somebody sprayed paint at somebody from the other side. They shot a man in the street. They executed a man in the street. A religious man in the street. And you don't mention it. It's not even a story. You talk about other things. The press should be ashamed of themselves. I think the press is actually, the media is what's fueling this, more so than even Biden.
To be clear, no one is arguing that police violence only happened on Trump's watch. It's been happening forever. And here are just a few examples of the media not mentioning the man who was killed in Saturday's protests in Portland and has since been identified as 39-year-old Aaron J. Danielson. But it's interesting how differently Trump speaks about what happened to Danielson versus the 2 people who were shot and killed during protests in Kenosha last week. Here's what he had to say yesterday when a reporter asked him if he would condemn the actions of vigilantes like the man accused in those murders.
You saw the same tape as I saw, and he was trying to get away from them, I guess, it looks like, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him. I guess he was in very big trouble. He would have been, he probably would have been killed, but it's under investigation.
I'm joined now by Ben Jealous. Ben's the former president of the NAACP, and Rasan Hall is the director of ACLU Massachusetts Racial Justice Program. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Hey, Ben, you just heard the president say his trip would help heal racial division. Can you make a case that it would?
I cannot. I've not seen a president in the history of this country. I don't know of any in the history of this country who's ever fanned the flames of racism and hatred the way that this president has. He appears to be doing it the same reason that George Wallace did it when he was governor, which is to, frankly, make it more likely that he'll win. He seems to have given up.
Well, you didn't have to go back to George Wallace. You can go back to Donald Trump in 2016. It worked in 2016. Why won't it work in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, The thing with, most presidents evolve in office, especially on matters of race and of national unity. There seems to be something transformative for any president about meeting so many people from so many places in this country. And they typically come away with an impression that we have more in common than we don't. This president's done just the opposite. As racist as his rhetoric was in 2016, as racist as his rhetoric was in 2008 and 2010, as he would attack President Obama over where he was born, he only seems to get more racist. He only seems to become a bigger fan of violence and of actually tearing this country apart. I guess that's what's remarkable about Donald Trump.
You know, Rasan, I want to talk a little bit about those who are buying what Donald Trump is selling. He was asked by Lauren Ingraham on Fox News about Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times. And here's the comparison that the president made.
The police are under siege because of things. They can do 10,000 great acts, which is what they do, and one bad apple or a choker. You know, a choker. They choke. Just like in a golf tournament, they miss a 3-foot.
You're not comparing it to golf because, of course, that's what the media.
I'm saying people choke.
Even Laura Ingraham couldn't bail him out, Rasan, there. What does it say that that comparison did not draw bipartisan outrage, either amongst elected officials or amongst real people?
I think it says that we are at a point of being numb, that we have continued to hear these types of outlandish statements from the so-called leader of the free world, and that we've developed, a position that it's expected, but that doesn't mean that it should not be critiqued. I think the other reality, though, is that there is still this countervailing narrative that exists in this country about the value and virtue of policing, and that it is overall a good institution when in certain communities it may be, but when you talk to the people who live in over-policed communities, particularly communities of color and poor communities, and especially Black communities, the experience of being policed and policing is very different. And it's not the comparison that that the current occupant of the White House made of it being 1,000 good acts and 1 bad apple or a choker, but it's the overwhelming majority of the people who encounter police and encounter it in a either violent or disrespectful or harassing way.
Well, you know, Ben, when following up on what Rasan said, when the president talks law and order, it seems what he's saying in a polite way is, hey, you white people, we're going to protect you from those Black and brown people, whether it's public safety, whether it's in housing. That's the message, is it not?
It is, and it's been a tried and true strategy with suburban white voters going back to the days of Richard Nixon. So the difference between Trump and Nixon is that Nixon could make a credible argument to the suburbs that he would be a calming and strong force. This president is just the opposite. He's Captain Chaos. And it seems that his strategy here is trying to inflame his base, to actually turn out more of the unlikely voters who are his hardcore supporters, rather than sort of tack to the middle and appeal, frankly, presidential. He appeals rather as a vigilante in chief, as opposed to a commander in chief.
I want to get back to the vigilante in chief in a second, Ben, but first, Rasan, you know, the conventional wisdom, I think, is very close to what Ben has to say when he used the term base and appealing to his base. But I would argue this law and order message has had a far broader impact. You've been involved in an effort, your organization, to get police reform through the most liberal, democratic legislature in the United States of America. It is September 1st, and we're still waiting to hear what's happening behind closed doors. I mean, it seems to me the president's words are having a trickle-down impact on everybody well beyond his base. Is that unfair?
I don't know that it's unfair, but I do think it's a little inaccurate. I don't think that the Massachusetts legislature is being persuaded by the words of Donald Trump. I think there is this pervasive narrative that exists around policing, that it is ultimately and inherently good. And to the extent that Massachusetts is one of the most liberal legislatures in the country, I like to say we suffer from liberal exceptionalism because of our history with abolition and same-sex marriage and how we vote in presidential elections. But the reality is when you look at all of the indicators across racial lines, from gentrification, segregation, educational attainment, wealth, and mass incarceration and policing, we have some of the worst racial disparities. And so it's not necessarily what Trump is saying, but it's more endemic to the understanding that a broader base of society has about policing. But when you talk to people, particularly in Black communities, the understanding and experience of policing is very different. And that's why we've had so many troubles trying to not eliminate qualified immunity, but just reform qualified immunity so that victims of police violence can have their day in court. But the progressive Massachusetts legislature has been resistant to that.
You know, Ben, you mentioned a vigilante in chief, and obviously he came to the defense of a man who's already been charged with murdering two people, first-degree intentional homicide, it's called out there. You tweeted this on the 26th, that the RNC, Trump and Republicans, have been stoking fears of out-of-control mobs in American cities. They even honored the St. Louis couple who waved guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. Now two protesters at Kenosha have been murdered by an armed vigilante. Are you suggesting a direct connection between the promotion done by the president and his party and the actions in Wisconsin?
Absolutely. Where else could it have gone? Where else could it have gone? I spent my life in protest movements. You have to be extremely disciplined if you don't want to bear some responsibility for things going suddenly out of control. And we have the President of the United States bring to the RNC a couple that waved guns, pointed guns at Black Lives Matter protesters. And then we have a supporter of the president who was at one of his rallies earlier this year, shoot two of them the same week. I don't see how you can't draw a line between those points.
You know, gentlemen, I want to end with talking about the fight back in this. Trump has relentlessly used the largest bully pulpit in the world to put out his so-called law and order message. The Democrats have responded. In fact, here's Joe Biden with a smaller bully pulpit just yesterday.
I want to make it absolutely clear, something very clear about all of this. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple.
You know, it seems to me, Ben, starting with you quickly if I can, that while Joe Biden is saying the right words, the force of his message is nowhere near as strong and powerful as Donald Trump's. Is that not so?
Ultimately, the powerful message for law and order, if you will, has to come from the people of this country. A real insistence on the enforcement of the U.S. Constitution, whose first purpose is justice and domestic tranquility, that it applied to all of us. This is fundamentally a protest movement about people's lives being sacrificed again and again, murdered again and again by the very officers who have sworn to respect and protect all of us. And so I think what you're seeing is the President of the United States on one side and generations of people of color, generations of white people who are fed up, standing up in the streets of this country and saying, enough is enough. It is time for us finally to be able to go to sleep at night and not worry that our unarmed neighbors are going to be killed by officers of the law. And so,
Rahsaan, I'm sorry. Rahsaan, I only have 15 seconds. Is the Democratic response strong enough for you?
No, it's not. And they can be stronger. And this language around riots, I hearken back to Dr. King's word that riots are the language of the unheard. And then he questioned what it is America has failed to hear. Those are the very things that need to be addressed, and that the Democratic Party or any party needs to be out front on to address these issues.
Ben Jealous, Rahsaan Hall, I thank you so much for your thoughts and your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
As the start of school gets closer, the battles over the return to classrooms in many Massachusetts communities are reaching a boiling point. Teachers in Andover voted to enter their classrooms today, quote, under duress, and passed a no confidence vote against the town superintendent after a lawsuit was threatened over several teachers working on the lawn in front of schools yesterday. Town officials called it an illegal work stoppage, but teachers said they were still working while protesting the school committee's decision to start the year with a hybrid learning model because they feel the school's buildings are not safe enough to protect staff or students from the coronavirus. The Newton Teachers Association also recently cast a vote of no confidence in the superintendent there and called on him to resign over his handling of the district's reopening plan. Newton was first planning to offer hybrid and distance options for all grades, but will now be all remote for most high school and middle school students to start. But even the remote plan isn't sitting well with many who've been rallying against state guidelines that call for all teachers to be in the classroom when delivering lessons, even virtual lessons. And this week, some of the top teachers in the state are making their case in a new Boston Globe op-ed powerfully titled, "Trust Us Like the Heroes You Said We Were." In it, they write, "These guidelines show an alarming lack of concern for the safety of our learning communities, as well as disheartening disrespect for educators as professionals." Two of the authors join me now. 2019 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, Jamil Siddiqui, who heads up the math department at East Bridgewater High, and 2020 Teacher of the Year, Takeru Nagayoshi, who teaches English at New Bedford High. And by the way, we also invited State Education Commissioner Jeffrey Riley to join us, but he was not available. Gentlemen, good to meet you, and I'm honored by your presence, frankly. Congratulations on your honor.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jamil, if I can start with you, how did this collaboration of Teachers of the Year come about?
It came out the Friday that DESE released the guidance. I was home for that Friday night, sitting on my couch, and I got an email from Sydney Chafee, the 2017 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, who then went on to become the National Teacher of the Year. And Sydney and I have known each other for a while now, and she reached out to the last 4 or 5 state Teachers of the Year and said, "What's your opinion on the guidance that came out today? Because I'd really like to get together and discuss it with you guys." And that was kind of the beginnings of it.
Pretty exclusive club, I should say. You know, Takeru, I just read a line from your op-ed saying that guidelines show an alarming lack of concern for our safety, as well as disheartening disrespect for educators as professionals. How does the disrespect manifest itself, in your opinion?
I think we were tapping into a lot of the frustrations our educators are expressing right now. Why is it that in a reality where leaders across the country, including our governor, are encouraging their citizens to work at home, are teachers the ones who can't be trusted to do their work from home, right? When I think about educators, we're the most innovative, we're the most collaborative and hardworking people out there. And when I also think about accountability to make sure that the teachers are doing work, there are many different ways to do that without necessarily putting ourselves at risk. And so the piece in many ways is a culmination of those frustrations and trying to make sure that that word is out there.
Do you worry, Jamil, first with you? I mean, I read some of the things that your students said about both of you when you won Teacher of the Year, and they were so beautiful. They were beautiful. Do you worry about potential damage this does, or what effect this has, let's put it that way, on students and their parents when they see such a divide between those who teach in the schools and those who run the schools, Jamil?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to make it clear that all of us, everybody on both sides, wants to be back in school. We want to be back in person. We want to be teaching our students. You know, and that's what we want to be doing. I mean, that's what we love doing as educators. Mm-hmm. But this is a different situation. This is about safety. This is about, you know, a global pandemic that's come and is now in our midst, and we don't want to put our brethren teachers in a position where they could be unsafe. And until we can guarantee the safety of the educators and the students alike, anybody who walks into the building, I think that's got to be the number one priority.
So, Jamil, do you think that Charlie Baker and Jeff Riley either don't understand what the conditions are, or they don't care what the conditions are? It's got to be one of the two from your perspective, yes?
Well, I think it's hard to make it that simple, because there are so many different districts and schools are in such different conditions. Like, for instance, my building, fairly new, built in the last 7 years, okay? But in my same district, we have a middle school and a central school that were built in the 50s. So now you start talking about the HVAC, the air circulations in these buildings. Every district has the same situation. I think that the different buildings from different eras, it's tough to make sure that all these buildings are ready to go, and to make I think the teachers, I think the students, I think the parents feel safe and comfortable making sure that we can get back in there.
Do you feel, Takeru, do you feel that the students and parents with whom you've been in touch, that they support what you guys are doing?
I think it's all over the place. I do want to make clear, Jim, that again, it's not an attack on DESE or the commissioner. Jamil and I, as Teachers of the Year, have worked really closely with DESE, including being on part of the Reentry Commission and committee as well. And so we really get that there is this near impossible task of having to guide districts around so much uncertainty with so many stakeholders. And that being said, we are really proud to serve with an institution like DESE that by and large respects our expertise and input. But to give my context as an educator who works at an urban high school that serves low-income communities of color, like we know what the research says, right? COVID has impacted communities like the one that I serve in, than say.
But they know that too, right?
Yeah.
They know that too, don't they?
Yeah, and I think what I'm trying to say is that when we're making these decisions, it's really important to make sure that the teachers are a part of these conversations, and that we're not necessarily making all of our educators, have a one-size-fits-all policy when it comes to something like reentry.
Starting with you, Jamil, it seems to me that regardless of how this reopening plays out, and despite how committed not just the two of you but all of your colleagues are to the work you do, that kids are not going to get the quality of education this year that they need. It's to me a given, whether it's hybrid, whether it's remote, whatever it is. Do you spend time thinking about how this hole that's being created is ever going to be filled for this generation of kids? Jamil first.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're being asked to be in a situation that, to my knowledge, no one's ever been put in before. I mean, the way we left schools in the spring, kind of just at a moment's notice, and now where we are today. So I think it's going to be a work in progress. I think we all have to have a little bit of understanding about that. I know that in my situation, the teachers I talk to are working hard and trying to figure out what is the best way to reach our students, to make sure that our students are educated and that they develop appropriately. I think that sometimes we've got to take a look at the curriculum that we're doing and say, let's get through what we can get through. Let's make sure we're giving a quality education on what we're getting through. But I also think that whole emotional, social piece of making sure our students are developing is equally important, if not more important. So I think that's, these are two big issues that we're focusing on and trying to make sure that we can reach our students through the various different methods that we're going, whether it be remote or hybrid or in person.
Takeru, we only have 45 seconds left. Do you worry about this transitional time? I can't think of a better term, whatever this length of time is before we return to, quote, normal in a classroom?
I absolutely do. I think about not only the academic effects, but also the socio-emotional effects, not just on our students, but also our educators and everyone in the school community.
Gentlemen, are you hopeful kind of people? I assume if your kids love you like they do, you must be. Are you hopeful about the future? You're both smiling. Is that a yes? Jamil, first from you?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we get back to in school. Like I said, I love being in person. I know Takeru does too. We love being in front of our classes and building the relationships with them. And I can't wait to get back to that.
How about you, Takeru? Hopeful character?
I feel like I have to as a choice, right? It's an industry where optimism and hopefulness has to prevail, not just for our own sanity, but also for the sanity of our students.
Gentlemen, I feel just a little bit of what I think your students feel in the classroom in your presence. I really appreciate your time. Jamil, Takeru, thanks for your work and thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
September 1st is traditionally the biggest moving day in and around Boston. And while there's still U-Haul truck sightings aplenty, as Cavante Small shows us, the scene today is far from the same as years past.
The move-in trucks still line the streets. It's just not as many as we're used to seeing.
Last March, colleges and universities sent most of their students home to finish the year online because of the pandemic. And after spending several months in her hometown of San Diego, Kara Pepper is happy to be back to start her junior year at Boston University.
I'm actually looking for a desk right now. I got a dresser and that's coming later today, and I haven't been able to find a desk online that I like, so I figured I saw one the other day when I was here.
Pepper was one of a handful of customers to browse Basics Furniture in Austin.
We've seen an uptick in sales on the internet and less people walking in, but we're happy to have them walk in.
Neil Wigetman is the owner of Basics Furniture. Having been around for 35 years, he's used to the ebb and flow of the seasons, and things are noticeably different today.
The buzz around town has not been the same. You just don't feel electricity right now because there are less people coming to town. However, the business has stayed pretty consistent.
Next door, Boardwalk Properties has been a staple along Harvard Avenue. Real estate manager Jose Feliciano says the realty market is also feeling the effects during its busiest time of year.
There's definitely a lot more units available that we have ever seen this late in the season. That's definitely changing.
With more schools adopting online classes, the rental demand dropped significantly. Feliciano says a decrease in international students is causing some landlords to feel the pinch.
The very high-end market that relays a lot on the international students, that probably was the one that got the most affected. There are a good amount of landlords that are still vacant.
There may not be as many students as usual, but in a pandemic, it doesn't take much to start an outbreak. Schools across the country are cracking down on large gatherings and parties. Boston University has already alerted its students if they host parties, they could face suspension, a measure Kara Pepper supports.
I'm really glad that at least there's that safety measure and not like those consequences for people who don't take it as seriously, because I want to stay on campus.
It's a new season with noticeable changes felt by businesses who need returning college students to be able to safely remain here. Cavante Smalls, GBH News.
COVID testing is, of course, now routine on campus, and of the 7 Boston area colleges and universities we spoke with, all of them told us they've set up isolation room for students who test positive or show possible symptoms. That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow. The new Dean of Brown's School of Public Health, Dr. Ashish Jha, joins me on the concerns surrounding the latest plan to fast-track a vaccine, possibly without fully completing trials, and renewed talk of a herd immunity strategy at the White House. That and more tomorrow at 7. And a reminder, the GBH News primary special starts tonight at 8. You can find it on 89.7 Radio, on the GBH Facebook and YouTube pages, or on Zoom. Again, it starts tonight at 8. Thanks for watching. Please stay safe.
He preached